Student discourse is one of the 5 practices in the D303 instructional playbook. Student discourse is a high impact practice that involves the exchange of ideas among students. It is not limited to interaction between teacher and student. It cultivates students' understanding of content and skills. It builds ownership as students independently share their thinking. It strengthens students' relationships with their peers. It informs educators of their next instructional moves. Instructional discussion is often thought of in terms of student and teacher. This can also be referred to as a rainbow discussion. Here, as exemplified in the graphic, students are interacting with one person, most often the adult educator. In a remote learning environment, the rainbow discussion is used to foster educator to student relationships and collect evidence of learning. In this module, we will be exploring opportunities for students to interact with others as well as the adult educator in order to maximize engagement and learning. Student discourse will also serve to build community and social presence in a remote environment. Shifting away from a rainbow discussion increases the contact points of interaction, makes discussion ongoing, and encourages students to be less passive as learners. As you review the outcomes of this presentation, consider the essential question: in what ways can I use student discourse to improve learning, build community, and increase engagement in a remote environment? First, let's look at the ways we can create opportunities for students to connect with each other and develop interpersonal communication skills. Tip number 1, provide clear expectations. Peer-to-peer discussion is a great way to create opportunity for student-centered learning. By removing the teacher as the focal point of the conversation, innovation can flourish. This is why it is important to establish boundaries so that student interaction is safe and all students are valued for their ideas. Try creating a checklist so that expectations are clear and appropriate discussion protocols are followed. Try a 2-column rubric to communicate expectations and provide feedback for discussions and online meetings. Templates and instructional videos regarding how to use the checklist and 2-column rubric can be found in the resources section of this folder. Tip number 2, create groups for asynchronous collaboration. To increase engagement and build community, consider the ways you can create opportunities for students to interact in collaborative small groups in addition to your whole group synchronous environment. Whether you are using Schoology, Google Classroom, or Seesaw as your platform, there are tools available that will allow you to create interactive groups. If you have experience using Google Slides, consider how you might use them as an interactive communication tool for small groups. In the resources section of this folder, you will find instructional videos showing you how to use these tools for asynchronous group collaboration. Tip number 3, provide a purpose for peer-to-peer interaction. To foster interaction, the purpose must be clear to your students. Consider, what do I want students to do with the ideas they access through discussion? It is helpful to identify this purpose in your online instructions to help students to fully engage. Here are some examples. Tip number 4, try banks. When students say, I don't know, they need a purpose. One way to point students toward a specific purpose is by providing a bank of responses to help them engage with a discussion question. The example we have provided in the resource section of this folder shows you how one educator created a bank of responses to use in place of I don't know. Consider the ways a bank of responses would support your students in discourse in your remote environment. Tip number 5, try STEMs. In the same way that banks support student discussion, we can use STEMs to support students' use of developmentally appropriate language, respectful dialogue, challenging vocabulary, and sentence variation. Here are some examples of STEMs you can provide based on the purpose of your discussion. A copy of this slide is available for you in the resources section of this folder. Feel free to make a copy of it and customize for your use. In a remote learning environment, we can assess learning when students make their thinking visible or audible to their peers. Tip number 6, ask questions that require specific vocabulary. Discussions can be used to assess application of knowledge when we provide an expectation that students use disciplinary vocabulary. Use the CPP strategy to ensure that your discussion questions assess application of knowledge. The first step in this process is to provide context. This means providing an opportunity to recall prior learning, tasks, or an essential question. Providing context will help your students to see the bigger picture as they launch into discussion. Prompt your students. Tell them exactly what you want them to do in the discussion. This is the core of your discussion instructions. Use verbs that are explicit in terms of the expectation. For example, describe, explain, summarize, identify. Finally, point the way to ensure that discussion is fluid and meets the expectations. Often, you can refer to the language in your rubric strand or checklist to ensure they successfully engage. You might also want to include a word bank to ensure they cover all of the knowledge targets you expect them to understand in their discussion. Here is an example of a discussion question posted on Google Classroom. Number 1 sets the context by reminding them of their last task and identifies the purpose of the discussion. Numbers 2 and 3 prompt the students, letting them know exactly what they should be doing in the discussion, posting a picture, and responding to a question. Then, reading and replying to a classmate by identifying a similarity. Number 4 points the way, ensuring students will demonstrate their ability to apply vocabulary in the discussion by providing them with a word bank. Tip number 7, invite students to share a process. Often, we ask students to show or explain how they came up with an answer or solved a problem. Inviting students to access other students' strategies and experiences is an opportunity to see or hear a different approach. Check out the resources section of this folder to find out how your students can share a process using different tech tools. Tip number 8, try the only one question quiz. In a remote environment, consider having students take an assessment as a collaborative effort, utilizing discussion to focus on process. The only one question quiz requires students to discuss why and how they determined an answer was correct, then together come to a consensus. Check out this discourse strategy in the D303 playbook, linked in the resource section of this folder. When we step back and allow students to interact with each other, we teach them how to take risks, think for themselves, and engage in authentic learning from others. Tip number 9, invite students to crowdsource. A remote learning environment provides an opportunity for students to seek input from others. Remind them that they can call, chat, or email a friend or family member outside of the home too. You might also instruct them to report back using tallies and graphs, or capture the feedback in a video or screenshot. Tip number 10, go metacognitive. After a task or assessment, assign a reflective discussion. Ask students to share in a small group or with the whole class. How did it go for you? What do you need to do next? Tip number 11, invite students to talk about failure. We can help our students build resilience by encouraging them to talk about failure. Consider assigning discussions that focus on learning from mistakes. The My Favorite No strategy from the D303 playbook can be used in a remote environment using Padlet, Google Slides, a Schoology discussion, or a Google Classroom question. Look for a tutorial on these tools in the resources section of this folder. Focus discussions on public individuals that overcame adversity and invite students to make connections. In this module, we looked at the ways student discourse in a remote setting can help create opportunities for social presence, collect evidence of learning, and foster resilience in our learners.